Welcome down to Horn with Dick Armey. Leader Dick Armey has been with us for 3 segments already. We've been talking about growing up in Cando, North Dakota. His time as a professor, PhD in economics, and being in the academic world, if you will. And then one day decides he's going to run for Congress and does and wins. And now we're going to focus on 1994 when the Republicans come into the majority through that November election. So we're talking to Leader Dick Armey. Leader Armey, welcome to On the Horn.
Oh, it's nice to be back.
So Leader Armey, you got that hat on, and I read about it in your book. So talk to us about that amazing hat you got on. I'm actually jealous. I'd love to have one, but I can't wear a hat. I got the wrong shape of a head for a hat, but you look darn good in one.
Well, the hat does have a fun story. I had given a speech at the Reagan Library and identified myself as a Goldwater baby and talked about my staff all having been Reagan babies. And then, of course, that was talking further about the Reagan legacy. And Nancy Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, she liked the speech enough so that she sent me afterward a copy of Reagan's hat that was made specially for him by the Stetson Hat Company. And she'd seen me admiring it. So I got that hat and I was wearing it all over the place. You know, my wife all of a sudden got her upset about it. She said, "You can't wear that hat all over the place. You're going to ruin it." So she went out and she bought me this hat. Well, she brings it home. I open the box. A beautiful hat. I loved it. I look at it. It is a 200X Stetson. That's the 200. The X's are the grade of the beaver. Now, just by comparison, the typical cowboy will have, once in his lifetime, maybe a 10X Stetson. If he has a 10X Stetson, he will only wear it to church. So this is a 200X Stetson. So I remember one of my friends in the Congress was a third-generation owner of the largest Western wear store in L.A., and he had never seen a 2X Stetson. I've never seen another one. So I like to believe I got the only one in captivity.
You know, Leader Armey, the brim and the way it comes together is quite remarkable. You know, it's just a perfect shaped hat.
Yeah, well, not perfect. Here, I'll show you something. Look at this part where it turns up in the back.
Yeah.
That's from putting it in the bin, overhead bin, when I ride in airplanes. So my wife doesn't like it one darn bit.
So most of these old gunslingers wore them a little cockeyed on the side a little bit. Maybe
yeah,
you should wear that. You're kind of a Texas
too.
Gunslinger. You kind of
straighten out. You got to tip it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it myself while I'm doing it. I got to do it just there. Get it there.
There you go. There you go.
Right.
There was a lot of great Westerns. I grew up being a Bonanza fan. In fact, my father retired at 53 and ended up watching Bonanza for, I'd say, about 25 years. And so he was a Bonanza fan and all those old Westerns. A lot of these North Dakotans, as you would know, are big Western fans, as they are in Texas. So it was a natural for you to end up in Texas, I assume.
Yeah, I have to be a little careful when I'm going around real cowboys because they'll look at me with a little grin on their face, say, "Well, we don't call you a cowboy until we see you ride." I'm in trouble there. My dad was a wonderful, good horseman and a great trainer and a great rider. I rode some. I think I was passable, but I certainly was not the horseman my father was.
You know, in your book, you did talk about training horses because when you were younger to make money, you had to help break some horses and did some training, correct?
Oh, well, my dad was a great horse trainer. He let me hang around him. You know, I was privileged in that regard because I never once in my life could afford any of the horses my father had, except one old horse he got for $200. The horse's name was Jasper, a little old cowboy, no papers, no background, no history, but the sweetest horse you ever saw. So I loved Jasper, and I could have afforded him. My dad tried to give it to me when I went to Oklahoma, but I was a graduate student. I couldn't even afford to feed a horse, let alone enjoy it. So no, I never took Jasper. I always missed the opportunity, though. He's a wonderful horse.
So, Leader Armey, before we quit talking about cowboys and hats, Texans have a suspicion of guys that wear cowboy boots if they're, in a suit sometimes. I've heard stories over the years. You got to be careful when you're coming down in the suit with cowboy boots in Texas if they don't suspect you're a real cowboy. Is that a true statement, or are you familiar with that kind of Texan
there's
mentality?
a little skepticism. Bikers have the same attitude. I ride motorcycles, and we take a look at these guys who put on all their leather and strut around and frankly make a big show about being a biker, and then we watch them try to start off and tip it over. So yeah, that's right. I love that expression, though. Yeah, we don't call you a cowboy until we see you ride.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But I could ride. I rode a bucking horse out out west of Amarillo one time. You might guess, sociology professors, they're pretty pernicious. Put me on this horse, and I got on that horse and strutted Appaloosa. He strutted around, and then all of a sudden he started across that pasture right next to the highway. He gave off a bucking show that you never saw. I had cars stopped watching this guy. Finally got him settled down and rode him back to the house, and the wife came out steaming. So, what are you doing on that horse? I said, well, he wanted me to ride it. She said, did he tell you he's been afraid to ride it for 2 years? I forgot that.
So you stayed on it, though,
well,
and rode him back.
I stuck to him. He wasn't necessarily that strawberry road, but he's a buck, and then he was worth leaving alone for sure. But it was a good ride, and I managed to not humiliate myself.
Well, I've done my share of being humiliated on horses. I'm an Arabian fan, so I've ridden a lot of Arabians, and they don't like to cross water, so I've ridden the Badlands a lot. And I recall one trip I got thrown 20 sometimes crossing a little stream in a creek, and so I'm kind of a horse guy, but my wife's the horse person really. So Leader Armey, we're going to pivot to 19.
Okay, let's take the hat off now.
Okay, I like that hat. Okay, we'll take it off. So Leader Armey,
I love that hat. I love that hat.
In 1994, Republicans had been in the minority for 40 years in the House. And it was a historic year that you were a part of. Now, set the stage for what it was like being a congressman and the mindset of congressmen having been in the minority forever as Republicans, and the idea that you and Newt and a variety of you had the audacity to say you could get control and become a majority. Talk to us about that mindset.
There's a fun story there. Dick Gephardt from Missouri was the Democrat leader and the majority leader, expecting to be the next Speaker of the House after the elections. And I was the first guy to realize that with the retirement of Bob Michael, the old fogies were getting out of our way, and we could be inventive and creative and take the majority. So I actually called the majority. So it was in 1993 that I was riding back from the White House with Dick Gephardt, and he was puzzled that I hadn't thrown my hat in the ring for whip after the Michael announcement. He said, why aren't you running for whip? I said, looked at him, I said, well, Dick, I'm running for majority leader. He laughed. He said, that's a great line. I'd stick with it, and I did. And bless his heart, poor Dick never got to be Speaker, and that was the end of his time as majority leader. But so I had that sense that this was the time to do that, and we had to get a plan. And we got together with Newt, and between us, and actually I think the driving force was clearly Newt Gingrich and me and our staffs. We had a wonderful staff. I had a great staff, and they were just meshed. So we went along and we stumbled along. We said, we got to have a plan. Somebody made the observation, it can't be just another bunch of campaign promises. So we struggled with, well, what we can do, when all of a sudden my chief of staff said, we were all in a meeting, he said, what we really need to have is a contract with America. Bingo, the lights went off all over the place. And so that was the birth of the Contract of America. And then, of course, we worked hard at creating it. It was not something that was random by any means. It was very carefully researched. The basic thing was there were a couple of rules. It had to be something that the public loved, that the Democrats had been keeping from a vote by their control of the House. It had to be something that had great standing with the American people. It had to be something that did not divide our own conference where we could get everybody to get around. So in the end, we had 10 separate items and then kind of an extra item that where we promised to bring ourselves under all the laws of everybody else. And we created that contract. I was in charge of the writing of the contract, but it was really a communal effort made up of task force from the various committees of jurisdiction. Most of the members of Congress had a hand in writing that Congress, and all of the Republican candidates in the fall of '94 signed that contract except one. And that one that did not sign it was Bob Michael's former chief of staff.
I'll be no kidding. So, Leader Armey, we're going to go to the break, and we come back. I want to talk about what was in that contract, and I think it's amazing. So your staff person came up with it and said it needed to be a contract, and for so long, it was like the Republicans were lost in the wilderness, kind of like the Israelites, it looked like to me, because they talked about it, and obviously Ronald Reagan was the beginning of getting people to rally around the conservative movement, and thank goodness we had you there and Newt Gingrich in his role. So we're going to talk about some of those elements of the Contract America. We've been talking to Leader Dick Armey, who's one of the masterminds of the Contract American. Republicans taking control after 40 years in 1994. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Arrowhead Cleaners. Newly renovated, modernized, and ready to make your cleaning needs hassle-free. From commercial and residential wash and fold laundry services to the latest in professional dry cleaning techniques, we are dedicated to your unique needs, offering alterations, fabrications, and even custom hat making. So whether you're a busy professional, a family on the go, or even a rodeo champion, Arrowhead Cleaners is here to take your things from messed up to dressed up. Now celebrating our 64th year in Arrowhead Plaza.
Let's be frank, it's a pain to be without your vehicle after an accident. That's why you should take it to Jerome's Collision Center. Our shop is supersized and we have the qualified staff to fill it up and work on your vehicle, step by step, piece by piece, in crazy fast time without sacrificing quality. When you need us, we'll turn your bad experience into a good one. We're Jerome's Collision Center and we're the best at what we do.
Hey y'all, it's Trent on the loose. I want to tell you, Lady Blue and I, we got a lot of miles together, but you know what? You and I got a lot of miles together as well. And all I want to do is bring to you the information on how we maintain a domestic supply of food and fuel for future generations. So I'm going to continue to travel the world and unearth the stories that make it possible that we can live in a free United States of America.
Welcome to Culture Crossroads. I'm Andrew Southwick. This is the show that covers the latest in politics, pop culture, and everyday people. The Fed raising and lowering the interest rate sounds like another way for the government to manipulate our behavior through the financial markets. We stand at the intersection of faith and freedom. They have to know that the jabs injure people, so why do they recommend it? Join me every week on Culture Crossroads right here on Beck TV.
Welcome back to On the Horn with leader Dick Armey. I'm your host, Gary Ameneth. We're talking about the contract of American Republicans getting control after 40 years in 1994. So, leader Armey, in the contract of America, you talked about having something that resonated with the people of America and actually holding yourselves to the same principle that you expected the citizens to for the laws that have been passed by the Democrats for the past 40 years. Talk to us a little bit about some of those elements of the contract.
Well, we had, pro-family tax reduction. We had strengthening defense. We had a little tort reform in there. There were 10 items in total. There were some things that we avoided because of the divisiveness within our own conference. There were, I can't remember now the 10 items, but I can remember that one of them was a constitutional amendment. Of course, that was term limitations. But the promise for the 10 was that we would bring them to the floor for a vote within 100 days. And I managed that 100 days, and we did it. But the thing that most of the Senate, many of the Republicans in the House and the Senate, and all the Democrats just mocked it and laughed at it. But in the end, all but 3 of the bills from the contract with America were actually signed into law. One was signed into law over President Clinton's veto. Welfare reform, of course, was an extremely important part of it. And he vetoed that 2 or 3 times, and then we finally worked it out with him and got it done. So it was, Newt always used to carry around a postcard. Newt was good at politics. I was good at policy. But Newt had the idea that, and he was correct in his observation, the most read publication in America at that time was the TV Guide. So we put the contract with America in the TV Guide. People tore it out, carried it around with them, and every time we'd pass one of the 10 titles, Newt would go to the floor and with a hole punch and punch a hole in his card. If you see Newt's speaker's portrait in the speaker's gallery, you'll see him holding a copy of the contract with America. I was so busy doing the digging that I never thought to keep a copy. I went and looked it up, of course, for the book, and it's all spelled out in the book, but I can't really give you chapter and verse. I can tell you this. We passed it all in 100 days. And the public was really enamored of that. The Senate was sitting over there laughing at it until their August recess. They came back from the August recess being so beaten up over not having passed any of the contract with America that they rushed to pass them. And in fact, they started taking it seriously now because they'd had too many meetings with constituents that were just digging them out for not having done it. So if it was good work and it had good standing with the American people, it had a good chance of being successfully legislated once you got the legislators to wake up to it. And the people, of course, across the country made them aware that we want this done. We see this now a little bit in with the Trump followers prompting Congress to get their work done. We saw it with the was a big, beautiful bill. But the public can make a big difference when they get excited and want something done. So I'm pleased about that.
You know, it's funny you'd make the analogy with the Trump's 100 days, because that's the only two times in history in my 40 years of following politics quite closely that are really become 1994. I mean, obviously the Reagan Revolution, what Reagan did, you know, through the early 80s was a big step in my life. But 1994 and what you guys pulled control. I thought we'd never get control of the Congress from the House side. I just never thought there was leadership there. But then what Reagan did set the stage. But now we had Trump do the similar thing. It is shocking what he's done, because nobody's ever had the guts, the fortitude to do what you guys did when you and Newt drove that whole thing through.
Yeah, well, we had the freedom to do it because when I first came to Washington in 1984, for the first 10 years, the majority of the Republicans in our leadership structure basically saw people like Newt Gingrich and myself as people that were just going to upset the Democrats. They all had their sweet deals and arrangements with the Democrats. We used to say the most important member in a ranking Republican committee, Republicans, the most important member is the chairman of that committee, because the chairman is the one who can toss him the goodies. And they made their duties. But we had a very complacent Republican minority, and nobody, absolutely nobody, thought they would ever see a Republican majority again in their lifetime. And we had the vision. We could see we could make it happen. And it wasn't easy. It was hard work. It took a big step. We had to be willing to be laughed at by all the establishment of Washington, and they did. But that wasn't whose votes we were looking for. We were looking for the votes of the American people that wanted to see somebody have a real agenda and a commitment to passing that agenda. And when Newt had a line, and I always liked to hear him when he said it, promises made, promises kept. We kept our promises. We fulfilled our contract. Everything got to the floor for a vote in 100 days. The big surprise was most of it was signed into law.
Well, that's what's amazing about it. And I did look at the statistics. In 1994, you picked up 8 Senate seats, 54 seats in the House, and 10 Republican governors. That had to be that had to be the euphoria just to say, okay, we got to get to work. And so the mindset, Leader Armey, when you got there, had to be shocking for the Democrats to all of a sudden think that they are now not chairing all the committees, they don't have the leadership, and all of that changed where all of a sudden Republicans have to lead. And while there was a bunch of you young punks, bucks, whatever you were at the time to say we're going to do it, you did it, and all of a sudden you have to lead. Talk about what that felt like. I mean, there was all those naysayers mocking you, and now you're going to do all this in the first 100 days. Of course, that mocking doesn't stop, just like they did to Trump 24 hours a day. I mean, that's just remarkable.
Well, of course, their next position was, well, the Republicans don't know how to manage the House. You know, they've never even been the chair. They don't have a chair. There had been no one in our conference who had ever chaired a committee in Congress that had been that many years. And then we distressed them even further when we, in fact, took control of the Congress and actually did a very good job of managing it. In some respects, managing it far better than they had. Then they resented that. And the first day, I have to tell you, the first day, opening day of a Congress had theretofore been pretty perfunctory. Not a matter of much notice and done quite quickly. We were at the job for, I'd say, 12 hours or so, and there were hurling accusations and epithets out of it. I heard the name Nazi, the word Nazi, probably 50 times during the course of the day, and screaming and hollering. And some of the Democrats, older Democrats that had been quite the gentlemen in their days as majority leader, were downright vicious. I said, politicians don't manage their disappointments well, and they don't manage their victories well, but we were doing a better job of maintaining a decent composure than they were. It was quite a raucous scene on the floor, and I frankly was very disappointed. There's a certain amount of grace. The people have spoken. You know, we talk about peaceful transfer of authority and power, but there was nothing peaceful about it. It was a pretty messy day. So, but we got through it and so forth. And actually, we did a very good job for 4 years following that election. The House Republicans led the legislative agenda of the nation. And I always like to think of my tech, because the House Republicans led the legislative agenda. The majority leader of the House that managed that movement of the legislation was me. So I kind of jokingly refer to the 26th district as that district which led America for 4 years. I'm a little bit puffed up on myself when I say that, but there is some legitimacy to it, probably not as much as I would like to believe, but it was a remarkable thing. For 4 years, practically no legislation originated in the Senate. It originated in the House.
Well, Leader Armey, you had made the statement during the press conference, and in your book, I just refer to it, you and Newt were doing it right after you came to power, and you said the American people didn't give us power, they gave us responsibilities, and we intend to fulfill them. I mean, that just shows where your mindset was. It wasn't about, pounding your chest and we're in charge now.
No, Harry Truman said it well. He said when he was president, he said, the only power I have is the power to make a bunch of damn fools do what they ought to be doing anyway. I think Washington is a town that is over enamored with the concept of power. And people go there and you hear all this power talk, yakety yak, and hyperventilating on that subject, and it goes to their head. It's not about power. If it's about power, you lose. It's about having the position and the authorities and the responsibilities to serve the nation. And if you think it's about you being a powerful guy, then you just marked up the wrong tree and you're bound to end up badly. So I just tested that. So when they put the question to us, everybody spoke in terms of the power we have because that was the way the question was posited. And I just said, no, it's not about power. It's about the authority and the responsibility we've been given and our right to serve that. And it was remarkable. Newt just kind of almost swooned over it. I didn't often say things that Newt would get impressed with, but he was impressed with that.
So, Leader Armey, we're going to go to the break, and we come back. I want to ask you a question not related to what your comment is about decentralizing Washington, where Trump's talking about moving some things to, Midwest and out of Washington, D.C. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So we've been talking to Leader Dick Armey on the Horn. I'm your host, Gary Emmett. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Base Flug Trailers of Dickinson is a family-owned dealer with expert staff that know their products front to back. We stock over 150 units of all types and can custom order a trailer with the unique features and capabilities you require for brands you can trust. Our experienced service team is the reason we're also the best place to have your trailer customized or repaired. Count on Base Flug Trailers of Dickinson to keep you hauling.
At the heart of every small town are the people that live there and the businesses that serve them. From sporting events to 4-H, Lions clubs to hospital foundations, Bassett Motors has worked for the past 23 years to make sure the heart of its area small towns continues to be the people. With over 15 employees, Bassett Motors prides itself on small town service with personal attention. Bassett Motors, where our customers send their friends.
We're the ladies of Another View. Join us at 9 a.m. weekday mornings. We'll discuss issues you care about from local and national perspectives.
You'll hear unique stories from fellow North Dakotans, plus topics in the national spotlight.
Start your day off right with Ladies of Another View.
Weekdays at 9 a.m. on Beck TV and online at beck.news.
Buffalo Gypsy Boutique of Mandan is where classy meets Wild West. Our clothing, decor, and gifts range from sophisticated boho style to quirky and antique. And we have the whole family covered, right down to the little ones. We're home to exclusive brands such as Scully, Old Gringo, and Tanner Mark Leather. And we proudly feature American-made jewelry, artwork, and genuine Kimes denim. Find Buffalo Gypsy classing up the corner of 1st and Main in Mandan.
Welcome back to On the Horn with Leader Dick Armey. I'm your host, Gary Amoneth. So, Leader Armey, before the break, I want to talk a little bit, get your opinion. The Trump administration has talked about moving some of this mindset of power in Washington. It becomes so centralized. And of course, we want our government to be strong in the world and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me, whether we call it the swamp and what's going on with that, there seems to be so much power there and it's warped in the way the average American thinks. Does it make sense to move some of that power out of Washington across the country? And is it a good idea to do that?
It's an absolutely good idea. The genius of our Constitution, those people were the greatest entrepreneurs in the cause of liberty in the history of the world, and they should be celebrated. But the dual federalist thing, there are some things that, quite frankly, just in terms of the physical reality, are more effectively carried out in the states than at the federal level. And the federalist system has historically been a very important part of our nation's ability to govern itself with efficiency and equity. And we had crawled away from that with recurring dominance. Obviously, the ugliest example, especially in terms of the results you see, is the Department of Education taking over education in America. But with the Contract of America, the biggest single item in the contract was welfare reform, and we moved a lot of the authorities and responsibilities back to the states. Tommy Thompson, as governor of Wisconsin, had set a very good example of that, and we learned the lesson by watching his success. So we did that a great deal, and it should be done more. And quite frankly, the government is too big and too busy trying to do things it's not well equipped to do. That's what I call the Dirty Harry principle. Man's got to know his limitations. There's some things we must do, and we must do well. And there are other things we will never do well. We ought to stay away from them and let them be done by the proper authority that can effectively execute the duties of that objective. But yeah, I'm all for it. I'd love to see us restore the prominence of a dual federalist system where the states have their rights and responsibilities, and they're respected in that by federal government. I always said that my prayer for America was that the United States government would be staffed by people that had the ability to recognize the goodness of the American people and the decency to respect it. We're far too far away from that.
Wow. You referred to in your book about the Democrat demagoguery that they always said the rich don't pay their fair share, and plus they are not to take it out on the poor. But you said the fact is the wealthy pay the lion's share of the taxes, and the poor are primary beneficiaries of the largest of them. So that is really began to have to pivot when they have that demagoguery about these rich got to pay all this money, and yet the biggest lion's share pays for that. and it's just a mindset about the way they handle that with welfare reform and what you're talking about. Give us some insight into that.
Well, first of all, you have to understand the modus operandi of the Democratic Party is narrative. They build a narrative. And I'm amazed at the number of times the narrative is inspired by some silly song or some goofy movie. So the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That came from a song in the 30s. And they harped on that all their life. But what is pernicious about that narrative, once you build a narrative, then you got to rig the data to support the narrative you built. So that my friend Phil Graham has just recently written a great book where he exposes all the ways in which they rig the number to overstate the amount of poverty there is in a nation, to account for the benefits that people declared to be poor receive. For example, all the housing benefits, the clothing benefits, food benefits, medical benefits, none of that's counted in the statistics. So, it's just, so they rig the data or ignore the data. And the fact of the matter, it's just common sense. Look at your last 3 generations. You know your generation, your father's generation, and your grandfather's generation. You tell me if, in fact, in each generation you didn't, on a very broad spectrum across the nation, all prosper. Did you not, in fact, does the, I always like to say, the counts and the barons of old, they had indoor plumbing, they had running water and so forth. The poor people did not. Now, things that were thought to have been a luxury are a normal part of our life. And the difference between communism and capitalism is capitalism turns luxuries into necessities, and communism turns necessities into luxuries. So yes, we all prosper, and we all prosper together. And the Democrats basically, I feel so sorry for their sort of limp-minded mentality. They just need class warfare so they can have something where they get to be the champion. And if there's nothing out there that makes me the champion, let me make something up. And that's what they've done.
Leader Armey, in your book, you talk about bureaucratic zealots and the whole idea that if you're, environmental, you want to go to work at the EPA. If it's about justice, you're going to go to the Justice Department. If you hate communism, you're going to go to the CIA. And so you have these zealots that get into bureaucracy. And when the Democrats had control for 40 years, that coupled with their turning things over and writing kind of vague laws that were not very definitive sometimes, empowered those zealots to overreach. Talk to us about that, please.
Well, they would leave loose ends in the bills. It drove me crazy in the committees. And when I began to pick up on a pattern, you always look for patterns when you're trying to find landmarks, and patterns that are supported by the same rhetoric. So time after time after time, when they would vote down an amendment that would tighten the language, clarify things, and so forth, you got 2 things. One, we'll let that be clarified when they write the regulations. Well, who writes the regulations? The bureaucrats hidden from sight. Or we'll let that get settled in the courts. Well, who settles it in the courts? The judiciary and the legal profession, largely left wing. And what happens is you get through the settlement in the courts and the regulations and an extension of the scope of the law in ways that could never have passed as spelled out in the committee. So I used to call that the legislative aftershock. And the other thing I pinned down was there is a bureaucratic symbiosis between congressional staff and these agencies. time after time, you see somebody from a committee that has jurisdiction over an agency moving their staff into that agency and bringing staff back from that agency. And so what you get is what I used to call rhetorical compliance. Everybody's thinking out of the same hymn book because they were all raised in the same choir. And we talk about the revolving door between business and Congress. I would say the revolving door between Congress and the separate agencies of the government is far more pernicious and destructive to the rational governance of this nation than that between Congress and industry outside.
You know, when you think of it that way and they talk about the swamp, it becomes very evident that what you just described is what the average American has said. We've had enough of that. They're so fed up with it. And the growth of that bureaucracy. You had made a statement about
Let me give you a very quick, concrete example.
Yes, please.
During the housing bubble, I had a very bright young man on the banking committee who came to me, and he showed me that what was going on in within this bubble, and particularly as it affected Freddie Mae and Freddie and Fannie. I took his work, and he and I traveled. We went to the Speaker, we went to the White House. We went to the senators that had jurisdictional, trying to get their attention. What did they do? Every one of them came back. Now, Dick, this is not something to worry about. Look, I have former staff over there, and they're telling me everything's okay. All right? So basically, when the staff of Freddie and Fannie, just as the staffs of the big banks, were lying through their teeth. They knew very well that what they were doing was a one-way road to destruction, but they were, in the short run, they were reaping the benefits, and they were stuffing their pockets, and never mind the long-term consequences. But we couldn't get the key people in Congress, the chairman of the banking committee and so on, to focus because they checked with my man in the agency and he assured me everything's all right. Well, those same people that were assuring everybody was all right during that time were the ones that were bawling their head off when they needed TARP to bail them all out. So they knew darn good and well what was going on. It wasn't just the bankers that knew very well that they were going to get a bailout sometime. It was the bureaucrats in the agencies, and I have to say, quite frankly, many of the people in Congress that should have taken the reins and started calling them to task. They did shut down congressional inquiry.
Leader Armey, we're going to go to the break. We come back. I want to talk about government shutdowns and what that means, number one. And then number two, I want to talk a bit about what President Clinton talked about, how we prayed for all the members of Congress, and a little story that you had at one of your press conferences. So we've been talking to Leader Dick Armey on the Horn. I'm your host, Gary Emina. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Ryan Rust is where you can find truly unique clothing, accessories, and decor. Our hand-picked selections make for memorable gifts for others and distinctive pieces for yourself, including custom tees pressed in minutes. Find Ryan Rust on the east edge of Mandan's Main Street.
Welcome back to On the Horn with Dick Armey. I'm your host, Gary Emina. So, Leader Armey, we've been talking a little bit about government shutdowns a lot in this country the last 7 or 8 years. But going back to your time when you first got the majority, that it all kind of came in, there was going to be government shutdown and people freak out. And you, in your book, make the case they overreact. Washington uses it. Politicians use it to their advantage. Help the public to understand why that's not as big a deal as they want to scare us with.
First of all, every time there's a discussion about a government shutdown, it's because of their failure to complete the process of the separate appropriations bill, discretionary spending, and that is approximately 30% of the total budget. And that's all that is affected in what's called a shutdown. Because they didn't get that signed into law, they have to go, you've seen the talk of omnibus spending bill. Well, generally speaking, when there is something called the government shutdown, this is a political discussion. It has very little to do with public policy. There's lots of whining and bleeding about it, and everybody gets panicky. But it is really quite an insignificant event, and nobody's ever really noticed the government shut. Then they say, well, you're going to stop Social Security checks and so on. That's all blather and so forth. So basically what it means is we're going to have to make some adjustments within the budgets of the agencies that live off of annual appropriations to negotiate through this period of time. It should have all been done by October 1st. And the fact is they didn't do their jobs, they dragged their feet and so on. And then they have the big hysteria at the end. You know, I'm going to write a book, I think I'm going to call it Alibi Ike, because there's no one more creative in coming up with alibis for why we're in a period of distress now for some reason other than my having failed to have done my job between then and now. And so the shutdown, it's just a big political yap is all it is. And it doesn't, in fact, affect a great deal of spending. And even that spending which is affected is only marginally affected. So yeah, they laid off a couple, and they also make it very dramatic. Oh, we can't go see the Washington Monument now because they had to lay off the people that take care of it. Yeah, I can.
So, Leader Armey, you had a great story in your book about President Clinton, who in the National Day of Prayer mentioned that he prayed for the members of Congress. And you tell the story about getting asked a question at a press conference when you did your regular weekly press conference. And tell us a little bit of that story, because I think it's kind of it just speaks to who you are so well in the whole idea of what you do at that press conference with Mary McCory.
It was a fun moment. You know, I've said before, the Lord sometimes delivers people onto you and lets you have a little fun with them. I call them my magic moments. But there was at that time, the Queen Bee of the press corps was a woman named Mary McCrory. She was a very harsh woman and she hated Republicans. I had a weekly press briefing attended by about 40 reporters. And all of a sudden after that prayer meeting, Mary McCrory walks in. She'd never done that before. So I said, she stepped right up and looked down on me, as was her right to do. And she said, well, the president said he praised for you Republicans last night. What do you think of that? I said, of course, I'm not surprised. I said, we're admonished in Romans to pray for people in positions of responsibility and authority. I said, I pray for the president. I pray for Congress. I pray for the Democrats in Congress. I pray, and I named a particular congressman. I forget who it was. And so I pray for him. And she said, you pray for him? And I said, well, Mary, I said, we're also instructed in Paul's letter, one of Paul's letters, that we should pray for those who persecute us. I said, Of course, I prayed for her, Dave. I said, you know, somebody more in need of prayer? And then I said, you know, since you reminded me to pray for those who persecute us, I'm going to add the press to my prayer list. She turned on her heel and stormed out the door. Not one reporter in that room dared to laugh.
Well, that's been the case for a long time for Republicans and especially conservatives. So we're having our day a little bit. So when we get a chance to give them a little bit of grief back, I think it's awesome you do it. So we got a few more minutes. I want to pivot a little bit to welfare reform, which I think is a very important part. You didn't get it done right away in the Contract of America because you mentioned earlier that Bill Clinton, and there's some battles going on. But eventually Newt and Bill Clinton came together, and welfare reform was a big deal that happened with their part, and I'm not saying you didn't play a part in it, but they seem to get all the credit. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, they should get the credit. We had tried, and the problem was President Clinton had said repeatedly he wanted to balance the budget, and he had repeatedly said he wanted to do welfare reform. We didn't trust him, and we should have. He was serious about that. And because of that, we had our loggerheads over that issue, and we couldn't get it done. And so we had sent the bill to him twice, at the end of 85 or 95 and at the end of 96. And he vetoed it both times. And everybody in town was pretty well prepared to accept, we're not going to get this done. It's not going to be possible. Newt Gingrich took it upon himself, even after we'd had some pretty bitter dealings with the president, to say, I am personally going to talk to the president and we are going to work it out. And he was willing to step out there and say, I trust the president on this, I will work with it. And in what were very carefully constructed negotiations with very few people, including Newt and the president, I thought it was important. Al Gore was left out, and I was left out. Al Gore and I seem to have an automatic ability to clash. But we brought in experts from the committees of jurisdiction, the Budget Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, and so they broadened the size of the group working on it and included the congressional experts from both the House and the Senate. And it was a wonderful experience in negotiation. And by the time they got it done, they had enough sense to let those committee chairmen that had been in the negotiations take it back and to share it with their committees. So when they brought it to the floor, it had almost universal support from the committees, even the Democrats on the committees. And we passed it successfully and got it done. It was really a very impressive exercise. And I said in my book, and I'll stand by this, Newt Gingrich and President Clinton deserve more credit than anyone else for the fact that we successfully reformed welfare. You know, of course, Obama took a wrecking ball to it later because that didn't fit his plans. But we would not have had 4 years of a balanced budget if those two men hadn't sat down and worked that out so carefully. And they should be respected for that legislative effort. It was a big task. I was visiting with Bill Archer a couple of years ago, retired wonderful statesman from the House. And he said, welfare reform was the biggest, most important thing we ever did during the time I was in Congress. I think Bill's correct in that observation. And Clinton and Gingrich deserve the credit. Bless their hearts.
Now, a little story near and dear to North Dakota, our heart, is the flood in Grand Forks, 1997. You talked about coming to a little bit related to this CODEL, I'm not sure how to pronounce the acronym, but related to some passing of some related to the flood and how Newt set you up a little bit, and you end up going to Grand Forks, but you got to see the flood. Come back to your home and fly over Devil's Lake, your own neck of the woods as a majority leader. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, Newt said, you're from North Dakota, you ought to do this. I didn't do Codels. I thought them largely a waste of time and money, and I had plenty to keep me busy, but I bid on that, and I organized a Codel to North Dakota for that purpose. Well, it was all well and good, except Newt comes in the next week, and he gets all the attention. But during the Codel, we did go to Grand Forks, and we did see the terrible flooding, but I had made the point. I'm not taking this group there unless we also observe Devil's Lake, because Devil's Lake was a phenomenon that was rare. In fact, I was the one who brought it to President Clinton's attention. And so as we were leaving Grand Forks and going to Devil's Lake, the pilot, we had three helicopters taking our party, and he says, we could just go 15 miles north of here and we could go to Leader Armey's hometown. Well, Sonny Bono's in the group, and so over all the airways you hear a chant, can do, can do, can do. So they fly to Can-Do and they circle around the town, and I'm telling everybody, there's a high school I went to, there's a hockey rink I played in, there's a swimming pool where I was lifeguard, and there was my home, and there was the park, and Yakety said we flew off, and that was little noted nor long remembered by anybody in Can-Do, but the guys, the members of the Codel enjoyed it. I mean, we do have a certain amount of admiration and respect for one another, and for them to actually get a bird's eye view of the Army's hometown. By the way, I should also mention Justice Thomas, when asked to speak at graduation at the University of North Dakota, also arranged that he would make that trip if he could take a side trip to Can-Do so he could see where his friend, I was raised. So he actually came there. They set it up. The marshals got in touch with my sister and told them, don't tell anybody. But he visited with my family, and they showed him the town. And I said, well, Clarence, dang it, you should have at least told people in town you were making a pilgrimage or something. But anyway, it was again, it was his wish that it be kept secret. But I always was a little flattered that Clarence wanted to see my hometown. But we do that. We like to see that. Where I went to, when I took my 281 trip, it tickled me pink to see all the members of Congress whose little stretch of road I rode on, whose courthouse I might have seen, and so forth. So yeah, we do regard each other with some respect.
Leader Armey, we are going to end this session, but we're going to come back. I know you're going to be going on a motorcycle trip soon, and we're going to look for some video footage and some pictures of your new motorcycle you got. And so we're going to be digging into that trip a little bit. So we're going to still stay with this whole majority that we had. So we've been talking. Thanks for joining us once again, Leader Armey. So we've been talking to Leader Dick Armey on the Horn. I'm your host, Gary Ameneth. Thanks for watching another episode.
Are you waking up in the morning with a sore jaw, headaches, maybe even ringing in your ears, all because you're grinding and clenching your teeth at night? That's exactly what was going on with me. I end up going to a dentist and he wants to charge over $600 for a night guard. That's when I found this, the Brooks night guard. This was a game changer. It's smaller than other night guards that I tried, which is a good thing because it doesn't make me gag. It could fit on the top or the bottom of the teeth. It's lightweight and super comfortable. Now the Brooks night guard redirects the bite force away from the back teeth, reducing jaw pain while still protecting the teeth. This unique design is what makes Brooks Night Guard different from all other traditional grind guards. Go to brooksnightguard.com and order yours today. Your teeth will thank you for it in the morning.
Go to BruxNightGuard.com and use the promo code to activate your special TV offer. That's BruxNightGuard.com. Order today and take advantage of this special TV offer. Your teeth will thank you for it in the morning.